Good day, gentlemen. I want to see what's on your guys' mind today. Tim, you want to start us off?
I sure will, Bruce. And I've been looking forward to talking to Bernie about this topic. So I can't wait because it's a topic he excels at. It's a topic of being a dumbass and how that's been so critically important both to Bernie and to a certain extent my brother Pat embraced it as well. And so, Bernie, there's a famous story that Pat used to tell about your IQ. And I think he would often say your IQ, you had a IQ of 65. It was tremendously high. Or and so can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Uh, when we would, Pat had the same problem I did that everybody has, okay, which is basically if we could all really admit how little we know and how stupid we are, then um, uh, uh, we'd be a lot smarter and we'd be a lot healthier and we'd be much less neurotic. In fact, you've got uh, a, a line from the Lords of Discipline.
Oh yeah, he wrote in Pat's book, The Lords of Discipline. Pat wrote this, I think, is a beautiful sentence. I wanted to become the seeker, the aroused and passionate explorer, and it was better to go at knowing nothing at all, always choosing the unmarked bottle, always choosing your own unproven method, armed with nothing but faith and a belief in astonishment.
Yeah, that was Pat. That's what made him so gifted. Um, but Pat was very much like me, and we talked about this in the last podcast. So he was dumb as I was, and Pat knew it. So when he was teasing me, we would go on tour. Uh, I told Pat once early on that when Pat would tease and tell everybody that he was teaching at the high school when I was a principal in Beaufort County. So he told everybody he looked up my folder and it said he was astonished because Bernie's IQ is 65. Okay. So he tells his story. And so when he tells it and we're on tour together, the truth is I said, God, it's that high, you know? And and uh um and of course what he's also referring to is that I hated school. I disassociated in school. And the questions that I had, nobody was interested in. You know, I had the questions at 5 years old, 6 years old that any kid would have. What makes the sun shine? Why does the wind blow? How does a flower bloom? Is there a God if you can't see him? Uh, um, you throw a ball up against a brick wall and it comes back at the same speed. Uh, you dribble a basketball, it comes back. Newton's law. And nobody in school, the teacher, and I love teachers, but if teachers didn't have any choice. They didn't care what my questions were. And when I was at home before I went to school, nobody asked me in my family a question just to see if I knew the answer. If they asked me a question and Bernie's 5 years old, and it was because they thought Bernie knew the answer. All right. And so I get to school and I'm sitting there and the I think it's going to be like at home or like in the neighborhood where you're curious about something and you find what makes rainfall. You're curious about something and you talk about it. Okay. And that's how you learn, you know. And it wasn't like that at all. And I remember the subject that I've always loved is reading. And I loved it because I was so good at it that I could get lost in it. To me, that's what learning is. When you playing basketball, you get lost in the game. You lose yourself. You're reading, you lose yourself. You're dancing, you go crazy. You lose yourself. This has nothing to do with school. Okay, this has nothing to do with standardized tests. Imagine if you had a standardized test, Mozart, a standardized test, Beethoven, a standardized test. Mozart himself says, love is the soul of genius. So the one thing I loved is I loved reading. And I loved it. Often, you to love something, you have to be good at it or get good at it. And so this was natural for me. No learning disability there, no OCD, no learning disabilities, which I had. That was the only thing I was good at in school was reading. So I was sitting there, and the teacher, we're reading The Little Engine That Could in one of those books. And the teacher starts asking questions. It's the first day of school. I'm in the Red Birds, whatever they are. And she says, um, you know, what's the title of the book? Well, Mom told me to be helpful, do please. I said, it's The Little Engine That Could. See, it's right there on the title, is right there in front of you. And and uh, And then she'd say, what color is this? Who are these people standing on the side of the train? Um, what are these animals called? Well, Bruce, it's right there in the book. Okay. Sheep, what have you. And I, of course, raised my hand to every one of them and answered. And so did some of the other kids. Okay. And every time we would answer, she would thank us. She would say, thank you. And so we would answer more. And I went home that first day of school, and Mom picks me up and gives me a hug and so forth. And she says, well, how was it? And I said, Mom, my teacher can't read. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, Tim. She could read a book, though I'm not sure how well. Okay. But she couldn't read me. She couldn't read the room. Intelligence is it's reading the room. It's reading the situation. Okay. You can't reduce it to a standardized test. Now, I finally admitted to Pat one time that Pat, I said, I've spoke out so much and wrote so much about it against No Child Left Behind, against standardized testing, you know, uh, how limiting it was and how it just measured the most mundane stuff and how inaccurate it could be and how it wasn't fair. Okay. In other words, we had become bribed since the 50s, even. Cult- Education is the cultural transmission of knowledge. You remember all that. We were empty vessels. We were to be filled. It was a factory industrial system. School was to be run like General Motors, but the teachers were in loco parentis. We were a business. Okay. So what happens is that we uh, we uh, we took the bribe, the grades. We took the industry, accepted it for what we thought it was. This way we get ahead. Well, what we get ahead of is ourselves. We don't know who the hell we are. That teacher didn't know who I was. I realized early on teaching, the question is not, and I've mentioned this before, what you need to know, that's really important. That's very important. But the bigger question is, who the hell are you? What's your story?
And with reading, what did reading um, open you up to?
It opened me up to anything, to the idea that there were things that I loved, people, stories, sports, other things, playing checkers with my dad, where I could completely get lost in it. And I loved that feeling. I loved that feeling of completely, of being surprised, of not knowing. And see, our problem is we don't want to admit that we don't know. And it's unbelievably arrogant because there's so much out there. We don't know what we don't know. And if we're curious, we can find out if we really want to know.
Well, I love this because I often think, if teachers model more and are brave enough to be in front of their students and admit they don't know
Oh,
and be vulnerable and show that vulnerability, I really think students then are brave enough to ask the dumb question, the question they held back.
That's the key question, because that's the question. Whether you're working with teachers and teaching teachers, teaching parents, teaching adults, or teaching kids, that's the key question. You want to hear, you want to be able to ask, to not know, so you can invite them into the same situation you're in, which is, oh, I'll help. But it's not like helping, like I helped my teacher, see, in first grade. It's inviting them in. It's open heart, it's an open mind. And so what happens is with Pat, he teased me about this, and we would have a lot of fun. And so one time I confessed to Pat in a moment of probably drunkenness. I said, Pat, sometimes I wonder, am I writing about, you know, uh, No Child Left Behind and Raging Against Standardized Tests because I wasn't worth a shit on them, or because I really believe it? Both things were true. They were absolutely true. Okay. The one was ego, and the other was absolutely and totally correct. And, you know, I was thinking about this, personality is what intelligence is. It's your soul, your heart, and your mind all working at one together. And I mean, you want to be great. Everybody wants to be great. Everybody has ambition. They may lose it because of school or for whatever reason, but they're born with it, with curiosity, with a love of the world. Okay.
Well, do you have any examples of like kids having their Mozart moment? And what I mean by that is that they show, they kind of tap into sort of their emotional imagination for the first time, and they're brave enough to ask a question. And
They feel so good when they do this, when they tell you what they're afraid of, when they tell you, usually they're telling you, like I did the teacher, what we want to hear. When they're not doing that, and they're telling you truly
I love that.
what's bothering them, what's they're afraid of, do they feel inadequate, do they feel, are they not speaking up in literature class because they're not reading, not working, or is it because of the bully and the put down artist sitting right next to them in class who is jealous of them and is going to put them down if they say something brilliant, and they believe it? And just to be able to say little things like that, things of abuse, sibling rivalry, romance, not feeling up to stuff, all of those things, being able to express what you're most afraid of and not covering it up with pedantry or with how bright you are or withdrawing because of how stupid you feel or self-conscious. When you come out with that, you come out with who you are, because that is who you were when you lost your innocence. That's who you have become. And to break through that and get back to your original self, to that little boy, to that little girl that's inside all of us, you have to do that. And I will tell you that, I mean, intelligence is like this. You're walking by an open window. Okay, you're in the evening taking a stroll, and you listen to the music is coming through an open window. If you know classical music at all, if it's Beethoven, you say, "Ah, that's Beethoven." Okay, or if it's Mozart, that's Mozart. That's because they were composers because they were great men. They broke the standards. They didn't take, can you imagine giving Beethoven a standardized test? Okay, it's a little like, frankly, giving Pat one. All right. And uh, and uh, Berlioz, well, he's a minor composer. You might not recognize him. If you're reading something and it's Hemingway, you don't have to see his name if you're a reader. Ah, that's Hemingway. Okay. Uh,
Or Thomas Wolfe.
Thomas Wolfe,
Yeah.
or an athlete, Jalen Brunson.
Yeah.
Look at Jalen Brunson lost himself in the game of basketball in the most wonderful way you've ever seen in your life. Everything was fucking improvised once he got toward that rim. All right. And yeah, so it's a question of Beethoven was a great composer because he was a great man. Pat was a very gifted writer, maybe a genius, because he was a very gifted man.
He knew how to love.
He knew how to
Yeah.
love, and he also knew how to hate.
Yeah.
And all that's important. He was true to himself, and you had to be true to yourself. Look, basically this. I'm uh, on the CUDA preference test. Now, let me make it personal here for just a minute. Pat was right making fun of me, and I was wrong, perhaps, but I did the same thing on the CUDA preference test, which you take in high school, to find out what you're good at. Okay, all the verbal stuff I did fine. However, in my culture back then, being practical was important, knowing how to fix things and do things and repair things. And on the CUDA preference test, on mechanics and spatial perception, basically the hammer and the nail, okay, and matching them up. I was in the 11th percentile, Bruce. Now, that was lower than anybody in my junior class but one girl. Naturally, what did I do? I focused on her. And I teased her unmeasurably, like Pat was doing with me. Okay, all right. And as Mom said, look, Mom and Aaron, after I retired from teaching, Mom and my younger brother Aaron were talking, and my younger brother's very practical, very bright that way, and I'm not. As Mom says, Bernie and Pat can't do anything. Okay, all right. So she asked my brother one time, how come Bernie doesn't know anything about finances? He's retired, he's got to get his finances in order, and he didn't know anything. And my brother said, well, Mom, it's because he doesn't have the mind for it. And Mom thought for a minute, and she said, you mean he's stupid? And my brother Aaron said, exactly. So my mom thought about it for a minute and she said, well, now that makes sense. Okay. All right. And my mom adored me. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, I was. And I grew up like that, where things that other boys could do, repairing, fixing, I can't even change a flat tire. There's no question, my spatial perception, I still draw a boat, like in the first grade, on top of the water. I could never draw it in the water. Okay. All right. And my spatial perception's bad. So the one the one uh, so I had trouble getting out of high school. That's why I became really smart through cheating, where I got a lot of help support from my friends. And and am I proud of that cheating? Absolutely. The system was totally unfair. What the fuck? Why did I have to read a science textbook? And which in those days it was a confusion of bad words.
So how did you being a dumbass and having and struggling um with the spatial awareness stuff, and how has that impacted you, like as a father in other lives, not as a teacher, but as a father in your
Huge,
other, yeah, well,
huge.
yeah, so what kind of father does a dumbass become, and how do you
If
parent?
you know you're a dumbass,
Yeah.
that's the key. Because let's face it, let's say you've got children or you're a teacher, you have students, or or you're not a teacher, but you have children. Okay. The one thing you don't want to do is set yourself up as this moral example. Oh, I worked in school. You need to too. This, that, I made good grades. You need to too. It's shaming. It's shaming, and it leaves the kid anxious unless the kid is unfortunate enough to be great in school. Then they have a problem. They don't have a problem in school because they're accepting the bribe. They have a problem in terms of being creative, intelligence. The only senior in high school I ever taught that could not handle my creative writing class was a kid who had perfect scores on the SAT. He had made straight A's and was on his way to either Yale, Princeton, or Harvard. And he just couldn't handle it. He couldn't look at himself. He couldn't tell you what he didn't know and what he was really curious about because he didn't know it. He had to know it. Okay. And this limited him. And and so yeah, he could write a research paper as long as it didn't get too deep into it. But if it did, it'd fall apart. See, he didn't have to do that for school. The bribes are easy if you're good at it. But what happened with me is I'm a principal, uh, and so if you know what you don't know, then your kids know that. If you can explain that to them, you could say, I wasn't worth a crap in math. My daughter, who's a brilliant kid, well, she's not a kid anymore, but a philosopher, she has dyscalculia. Okay. I was terrible in math. It wasn't quite dyscalculia, whereas she could handle all the abstract stuff. I couldn't. If it came to algebra, I didn't even know why they had letters in there instead of numbers. Okay. Uh, I could do the computation. She has just got with the computation. Well, am I going to put her in a sophisticated advanced? She's going to be in sophisticated advanced classes because she's very good in everything else, verbally and so forth. Am I going to put her in an advanced math class when what do you call them? The advanced classes.
Yes, the honors class.
The honors classes.
Yep.
Am I going to let her put herself in a math class of trigonometry and so forth? Of course not. Maggie, do what you're good at and go where the losers are. That's what they called them back then. Get people smoking dope in class. Get yourself a C. Okay. And mom used to say that about me. If When I would say, you want me to be perfect, mom? You want me to, in school? No, Bernard, we're striving for average. Okay. And she was right because I was good in English, bad in math. Science was a confusion of jargon and bad words. A kid who loves language like I do, like I did, having to look at the phrase phylum oblongata in a seventh grade science text. I mean, I'm all ready to talk about lizards, frogs, whatever you want to talk about. What is the dribbling? How come it comes back? Okay. Um, How come we don't fly off the face of the earth? All these freaking questions. And I'm looking at nothing but words that are offensive as hell to me. And that's because I loved language. And uh, even on the reading part of standardized tests, when it comes to fiction, memoir, journalism, I do real well, not surprisingly. If it comes to like social science, factual, statistical stuff, I tune out. And I tune out and don't do well there. And because that's a difference. And these nuances in intelligence are vast, they're incredible, they're numerous. You have to be curious about yourself, about these things in order to understand them. You have to say, I don't know. How come I do bad there? Okay. And when I was uh, uh, uh,
So you have to become self-aware.
you've got to
Yeah.
become self-aware. You have to know who you are, what you're good at, what you're bad at. And if you don't, and you asked me this before, Tim, if you don't, you are like me, and you are like the guy Shakespeare was talking about. Okay? If you don't, you become afraid. You become anxious. What happens when you're in school or when you're up against something you don't know how to do, and everybody else seems to? You're lonely. You're self-conscious. And what I did, and what most people do, is they dissociate from the situation. You tune out. You tune out. For me, I started daydreaming in school. That's where I learned to daydream. It's where I learned to wonder about things. Okay? And fantasize. That daydreaming is what eventually got me into Harvard. So in other words, don't pay attention to tests.
That in your reading.
That in my reading.
And your imagination of, you're able to tap in.
Well, watch this, Tim. Remember, it was also my civil rights work.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In other words, I was inventing stuff. Pat was too. We probably had the first Black Studies program in the state of South Carolina. I was integrating schools. I loved it. I had ambition. I realized, Jesus Christ, these kids love my ass. I love them. We're going to town, you know? And I was I did what I was afraid of. Okay, if it was going to piss off a racist, that's when I did it. And yeah,
I'm a sort of bring this towards a conclusion. And I'm a say this sort of as a wrap up, and I want you to sort of to wrap it up after I say. But when we talk about being a dumbass, we're talking about getting to know your strengths and weaknesses and digging into what makes it hard for you to learn, what makes you defensive, and really understanding your what is your weakness. Yeah, what is your weakness? And so we're not trying to insult anybody. We want to tap in that vulnerability that students and teachers must have to gain trust.
I felt guilty when I was reading and couldn't do my math homework.
Yeah.
I felt guilty. Okay, I felt anxious. In other words, I didn't want to feel that way. So what do? The natural thing to do is dissociate from it, forget about it, screw it. Okay, and that's how you get yourself in trouble. If I could have said to myself, I am bad at this, I am bad at that. I failed the National Guard exam, for God's sakes, when I was trying to dodge the draft in Vietnam. I'm a school principal in a small town. I'm the only one there trying to get the National Guard that has a coat and tie on. There's two lines. I passed one line, and that's the line of people who are going to get tested. Well, they moved me, the great Bernie, to the front of the line because I'm not one of these guys like who dropped out of high school, who dropped out of college and working on the highway, Yeah. Okay. I am Bernie. I'm a school principal. This town is very small, so I'm hot snot. Okay. So I'm going back, and these are friends I knew from high school. And I was even teasing them and saying things like, maybe if you'd studied and done your homework like I did, maybe you could be moved to the front of the line. Up yours, blah, blah, blah. We're talking to each other. We know each other. I get in there, it's 100 questions. Social studies, fifth grade, verbal, easy as hell. Um, even math. The math is fifth grade. It's easy. It's computation. It gets to mechanics and practicalities and spatial perception. Again, the hammer and the nail, the changing of the flat tire. I miss 24 out of 25 questions, all in that block. And I fail. It's a 76. All these other people could have done those tests and screamed to high heaven at how good they did. There's two lines. The people who fail walk through a different line, past the first line. So everybody can see that Bernie could not get in the National Guard because he was a screw up. He's stupid. I think that story is a great story.
So bring us home. What's your parting wisdom?
My parting wisdom is have a sense of humor, be able to laugh at yourself, know what you're not good at, and remember too, if you can, avoid it. If you can't, then that means you really have to go to work and develop the patience it takes and learn how to psychologically handle, okay, nobody's coming by and I have a flat tire. What the hell do I do? And you prepare yourself for those situations. And or you may leave your car where it is and walk 3 miles to your house and get help. In other words, it doesn't surprise you. It doesn't surprise you to be in a position of being a dumbass. You know you're one. Okay. If you have to wait for somebody to come by, maybe you should have a book in the car if you're a good reader, whatever. But not knowing makes you neurotic as hell. And it's a myth that you're smart because you make good grades and do well at standardized test scores. We're looking for a hell of a lot more than that. Okay. And everybody. So what you're curious about naturally, what you're good at, the key is this, Bruce, what you can really lose yourself in. That's what you love. And love, according to Mozart, is the soul of genius.
I think that's a great way to end it. And thank you for watching Conversations with Bruce, Bernie, and Tim.